I think basically the conclusion has been, even though not officially acknowledged, that India just could not afford the economic hardship, the poverty, the deprivation, the fact that we're seeing the biggest mass exodus of Indian people, the migrant workers that you referred to since the partition of this country. The lockdown had one purpose. It was to better prepare our health system. I'm sorry to say that that has not quite happened. Our hospitals are not in the state that they should have been. We do not have enough jumbo facilities. I have personally gone to graveyards and crematoriums and hospitals where people have had to run sometimes to 10 hospitals to get a hospital bed. Yet despite this beleaguered health infrastructure, I think everybody has, in a sense, resigned themselves to the fact that as a country of 1.3 billion people, a diverse country, not a very rich country, our poor, our economy simply cannot afford to be in lockdown mode anymore, Beverly. So I think that conflict that many countries in the world are struggling, to find the balance between lives and livelihood is one that we have struggled with very much here as well.
Isn't it the case, though, that those very people that have been acutely disadvantaged by the shutdown will also be the ones that are probably going to be in the front line of catching this virus and potentially, being resigned to being the ones that are going to be the casualties?
Absolutely. I'll share a little story with you. I went to a graveyard where some of the graves have had to be dug by hand because there is an unfortunate stigmatization here. We have families not willing to claim their dead, disowning literally people they love because there's such stigma, there's such paranoia. So you actually have even the mechanical grave diggers refusing to make graves. And I met a grave digger who was preparing graves by hand. And then I met a man whose 40-year-old wife had just died from the coronavirus. And he said to me, and the words really stay with me, he said, "We are poor and therefore we will die like insects." He said it in Hindi, but he said, "Like insects, we will die." And another woman that I met in a slum tenement, she works as a domestic help in the high-rise buildings of Bombay, India's financial capital. And she said, "What kind of justice is this, that the virus was brought in by the rich on an aeroplane, and it's the poor of India who are out on the street either walking or on bicycles?" So there's no question that as we struggle with this pandemic, it is the poorest Indian who's paying a price to keep the middle class and the elite safe. The lockdown is really for my class. It's the poor of India who are paying a very, very costly price.
Yes. Give us a sense, your reporting on this has been astonishing, but the migrant workers that you have walked alongside, give us a sense of the perspective you've got of just what a crisis that was for them, literally to just be ordered home and without work overnight.
So what happened, I think, was that they were rendered invisible by our policymakers. India locked down at 8 p.m. one evening, a little over 2 months ago, and said that from midnight, this country is in lockdown, and simply failed to anticipate that about 45 million Indians could be out of work because most of them are daily wages. They depend on what they earn on a given day for food. And so suddenly you had all of these people out of work, out of wages, and panicking, just like you and I would, and saying, look, if we're going to die, if this virus is going to kill us, we'd rather that when we die, we are with people we know. We'd rather that we are with people who will look after us. Here, we don't even know if someone will come and give us a glass of water. That's what so many people said to me as I walked with them. And I saw children walking without shoes in the hot, blazing Indian summer, walking over stones and glass, walking hundreds of kilometers often, sometimes walking through the night because it was too hot to walk in the day. And I think that the biggest policy failure of this lockdown has been that we simply failed to anticipate what would happen to millions of Indian workers, and thereby we actually created a humanitarian crisis that is bigger than the medical crisis. India's only just started dealing with the medical crisis. We've had the largest single-day spike since the outbreak of the pandemic. Mercifully, our fatalities remain somewhat low compared to the rest of the world, and we don't exactly know why. Maybe because we're a younger country. But in the meantime, the humanitarian crisis, Beverly, is so gigantic. And, it's ironic that just as the restrictions are lifting is the moment when we've got the workers back to their villages. This is the time when factories would have hoped the workers would return to the city so our factories could open. So on the one hand, you have the abjectly poor not knowing how they're going to live, what they're going to live off, once they're back in the villages. And on the other hand, you have small factories in the cities not knowing how they're going to open because there are no workers to power these factories anymore.
And that's such an irony that you point out. So what is now going to happen? We've had the court ordering that people are allowed to get home, but now they're really needed back at work. It's not necessarily something that's going to be resolved quickly.
I think the court order, frankly, just came too late. I was disappointed with the judiciary, with our Supreme Court for not intervening early enough. I was disappointed that on the 30th of March, the government went and told the Supreme Court that there were no migrants on the road, because for 2 months after that, I have walked on at least 12 to 14 national highways of this country with those workers. And I had absolutely no idea why, the court was being told that there are no workers on the road when we had documented this on camera in state after state after state. So I think the court intervention has simply come too late. We have created a gigantic crisis for ourselves as a country, and our way out of this economic, paralysis, in a way, that's the word I would use. There could be potential economic paralysis in some sectors of our economy. We don't know the exit from it. And a lot of people are now saying, maybe the lockdown model was a copy-paste of the Western world. Maybe we should have had a different model when we locked down. And now that we're beginning to unlock, there's a fear that we're again being a little unmindful. And if suddenly the fatalities were going to erupt on us, we would just simply not know what to do. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's a very real concern.
Indeed. And do you think there's been political fallout for Modi, although we shouldn't be thinking of politics at this time because the human cost is so huge?
I know what you're saying, and actually there's a lot of anger among the poor, but it's not obvious that there will be an immediate political cost, especially if the Modi government is able to argue that the fatalities were contained. Then Prime Minister Modi would turn around and say fewer people died in India than anywhere else in the world. So I think a lot is going to depend on how these numbers eventually pan out. There are experts who say that we are still not seeing our peak. We could still be a few weeks, if not a month away from our peak. So the answer simply is that the political consequences, not just for Modi, but even for our state governments, will depend on where the numbers finally settle down. And we don't have the answer to that yet.
Yes, many answers lie ahead. Barkha, so appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.